Continuação da leitura do livro The New Map. A leitura segue em inglês, que é a língua original, o idioma original do livro. China's Map. The G2, Chapter 17. The piling up of all the Gs can get a little confusing. There is the G7, the annual meeting of the world's leading industrial nations, which for a time was also called G8, and then, after Russia was expelled, became the G7 again. Then there is the G20, the major economies. The G7 and the European Union, plus big emerging markets, including China, India, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia, once thought by some as destined to become the board of directors of the global economy. The G20 remains more of a discussion and coordination group. Then, to confuse further, there is the G2, except there is no G2, at least not officially. Yet, it is very real, in the sense that it is the most decisive grouping of all. It has more say over the future of the world economy and, indeed, over the rest of this century, than any other grouping. The G2 comprises just two countries, the United States and China, which together represent about 40% of the world's GDP and 50% of the military spending. The G2 is not an alliance or a forum for decision-making. Rather, it underlines the importance of the relationship between these two countries and their new rivalry and its impact on the entire world. Not so long ago, the United States and China were thought to be ever more bound together by their interdependence. Integrated supply chains, iPhones designated in the United States but manufactured in China, for instance, total trade in 2018, before the trade war, of $738 billion, $116 billion of U.S. investment in China and Chinese investment in the United States, totaling $60 billion, plus more than 360,000 Chinese university students in the United States, contributing to $13 billion US dollars to the U.S. economy. This interdependence was propelled by China's joining the World Trade Organization in 2001, what Bill Clinton would call one of the most important foreign policy developments of his presidency. The aim was to bring a rapidly rising China inside a market system for global trade that would, as Clinton put it, mean that China's actions would be subject to rules embraced and judged passed by 135 nations. It would open the Chinese market to U.S. business and support global economic growth. Interdependence and engagement would promote a convergence of interests that would reduce the risk of conflict. This set of ideas added up to what we call the WTO consensus. Despite the criticism at the time, there did not seem to be any obvious alternative in the face of China's growth economic might. But the WTO consensus has broken down and the G2 is fractured. Engagement is giving way to entrenchment. Trade wars and conflict over economic and security issues talk of decoupling of the two economies and arms race. And what is coming to be seen as the battle for economic models and indeed for primacy in the rest of the century, all this seems to point to the development of a new Cold War, albeit of the different kind than that between the United States and the Soviet Union. The disruption and terrible human and economic costs of the novel coronavirus epidemic in 2020 led to a real, if temporary, decoupling, as air travel was cancelled and trade constrained, recriminations mounted, and hostility reached a new level. Does all this mean that China and the United States are headed for what Harvard professor Graham Allison called the Thucydide trap, named for the ancient Athenian military historian? The concept describes the risk of war arising from the collision between a dominant power and a rising power. The main examples begin with the war in the 5th century BC between dominant Athens and rising Sparta, which Thucydides chronicles. Described a series of events. It went on for 30 years and left both city-states devastated. The other case studies includes the naval race and economic competition between Britain and Germany that culminated in the First World War. At the end, both victors and vanquished were much worse off, and the carnage laid the ground for the Second World War. None of these historic cases, of course, involved large arsenal of nuclear weapons, nor, of course, cyber war. While the validity of the Thucydides trap is debated, it has become part of the vocabulary. There is no such thing as the Thucydides trap in the world, said Xi Jinping on a visit to Seattle. Yet, he warned, should major countries time and again make the mistakes of strategic miscalculation, they might create such traps for themselves. From the collapse of Soviet communism in 1991 until the 2008 global financial crisis, the U.S. design for global economic management had been generally accepted, but the 2008 disaster blew up in the heart of the American economy and, as the Chinese saw it in the core of the capitalism world, the Chinese model of a state and party-managed economy offered an alternative. Moreover, China was the engine that first pulled the world economy out of the crisis in 2009 and back to recovery. China no longer felt the need to look to the United States for either guidance or role models. In the Chinese view, the financial crisis was a watershed, like a time for important change in the history of the US-China relations, that was compelling the United States to treat China as a co-equal. In the aftermath of the financial crisis, a Chinese strategist published a book titled The China Dream: Great Power Thinking and Strategic Posture in the Post-America Era. It argued that conflict with the United States was inevitable. It was a bestseller in China. This shift would be reinforced by the changing balance in the world economy. China has become what Britain had been during the Industrial Revolution, the manufacturing workshop of the world. A few examples. China today is the world's largest producer of steel, almost 50%, aluminum, and computers, as well as the rare earths necessary for electric vehicles and wind turbines. In one 3-year period, 2011-2013, China consumed more cement than the United States did to the entire 20th century. It has financial weight. SAFE, the State Administration for Foreign Exchange, holds foreign reserves totaling $3 trillion, about 1/3 of its U.S. government debt. It is also rapidly becoming a country of consumers, as Beijing seeks to shift the economy from export-driven to consumer-driven. In 2000, 1.9 million cars were sold in China, 17.3 million in the United States. By 2019, the number was 25 million in China and 17 million in the United States. The weight of China in the world economy was made clear by the novel coronavirus. When the SARS epidemic began in 2002, China accounted for only 4% of the world GDP. When the coronavirus hit in 2020, it was 16%, meaning that the economic impact would reverberate around the world even before the coronavirus shut down much of the rest of the world. When GDP is measured by exchange rates, the US economy is still larger than China's. By the other major measure of GDP, purchasing power parity, China is already the largest economy in the world. By that measure, it overtook the United States in 2014. Just to note, Germany's economy overtook Britain's in 1910, 4 years before the outbreak of the First World War. But one reality check is in order for China's future growth. Demographics, the consequence of one-child policy and social changes. No country has ever gone gray at a faster rate. Demographer Nicholas Eberstadt has observed. Over the next 2 decades, the number of older people will increase dramatically, while the number of people of working age who drive economic growth will decline just as dramatically. Other challenges include the scale of domestic debt and the structure of the economy. When it comes to oil, the difference between the two countries is stark. China imports 75% of its petroleum, which Beijing sees as a major vulnerability and is one of the drivers of its strategic policy. The United States used to share such concerns when its import levels were high, but owing to shale, no longer. The rivalry between the two countries is certainly evident in military capabilities. Our military has always fought with great spirit, Xi Jinping said on a visit to the division famed for fighting US forces during the Korean War. In the past, we had more spirit than steel. Now we have plenty of equipment. It also has the money. Over the last 2 decades, China's military expenditures has grown 6-fold, 6 times as great. In the latest comparative numbers, it is $240 billion compared to America's $634 billion. The third of the fourth spenders are behind: Saudi Arabia and Russia, each around $65 billion. China's military has, in the words of Rand Corporation assessment, transformed itself from the large but antiquated force into a capable modern military. It has narrowed the gap with the United States. Crucially, it has the advantage of proximity in most plausible conflict scenarios, and geographical advantage will likely neutralize many US military strengths. It has also focused on developing a wide variety of missiles, air defense, and electronic capabilities that could neutralize US capabilities from ships to satellites. The United States is hardly standing still. In response to the emerging capabilities of what is now called a great power peer-level competitor, the US military is making a major shift in focus, strategy, and weapons. The US Marines, for instance, are going through a transformation, in the words of its new force design, away from 2 decades of fighting on land against violent extremists in the Middle East. Instead, it is to become an agile naval expeditionary force able to move with great speed and in dispersed fashion from island to island in the Pacific in order to neutralize a Chinese navy that is capable of attacking traditional US military assets. China's preponderance in Asia continues to increase. In early 2017, just days after becoming president, Donald Trump yanked the United States out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have encompassed 12 nations that border the Pacific, though specifically excluding China. In a new bloc representing 40% of world trade, it would have asserted U.S. commitments to Asia and given other Asian nations a counterforce to the powerful magnetic field of the Chinese economy. For those nations, it was as much political as economic, and Trump's actions was seen in Asia as marking a retreat from the region and an opportunity for China to fill the vacuum. Indeed, one Chinese called the U.S. withdrawal a huge gift to Beijing. No longer hampered by the counterweight, China proceeded with negotiations for its own trade agreements with Asian countries, excluding the United States. Xi Jinping demonstrated China's new great power status when he hosted 29 leaders of other countries at the Beijing Forum. He made clear that China, unlike the United States, would not lecture them about human rights nor support democracy activists. We have no intention, said Xi, to interfere in the other countries' internal affairs, export our own social system, or to impose our own will. His message was warmly welcomed by the leaders drawn to Beijing by the prospects of China's economic largesse. The rivalry of the G2 is most evident in the two arenas. One, the South China Sea, involves literally geographic maps. The other, what is known as Belt and Road, represents an effort to redraw the map of the global economy. In both, energy is deeply intertwined. There are other danger points, beginning with the fundamental issue of all Taiwan, that Taiwan is not an independent country and that it is not to move towards independence. It is the oft-repeated core interest of China. Beijing is explicit that it would use military force and, if required, go to war to prevent any such move. Another danger point are tiny, uninhabited but strategically located islands northeast of Taiwan that both China and Japan claim. North Korea and its nuclear weapons and missile programs are a focus of great concern. Yet the South China Sea constitutes what has been described as the greatest point of tension, directly between the United States and China, or, as Admiral James Stavridis, former OTAN NATO Supreme Commander, put it, the South China Sea is the most dangerous potential confrontation between the United States and China,